The last person to ever see Jill Meagher alive watched her disappear into darkness at 1:42 inches the morning. In the grainy CCTV footage, she looks completely calm. A young woman walking home through a familiar Melbourne street after a night out with coworkers. Nothing about her body language suggests fear. Nothing suggests danger. She's carrying her handbag, speaking casually to a man in a blue hoodie beneath the glow of a storefront light. Cars pass by. The city feels alive but sleepy, ordinary in the way cities do after midnight. And then the footage ends. Jill walks out of frame, only 500 meters from her front door. 7 minutes from safety. 7 minutes from the husband waiting for her at home. She never makes it there. Somewhere in the darkness beyond that camera, a predator was already deciding her fate. And what investigators would later uncover about that predator would horrify not just Australia, but the entire world. Because this was not a random monster appearing out of nowhere. This was a man the justice system already knew. A man who should never have been free. But before the investigation, before the trial, before the headlines and public outrage, there was simply Jill. A woman who had built a life people genuinely loved being part of. Jill Meagher was born in October of 1982 inches, Drogheda, Ireland. Her childhood shifted between worlds. When she was young, her family moved to Australia after her father found work in Perth. She grew up partly under the Australian sun, but she never lost the warmth and humor of her Irish roots. Friends later described her as magnetic, the kind of person whose laughter immediately changed the energy of a room. She was intelligent, witty, deeply empathetic, and somehow capable of making people feel important within minutes of meeting them. In 1996, the family moved back to Ireland, and Jill eventually attended University College Dublin, where she earned a degree before beginning work with RTA, Ireland's national broadcaster. Her life seemed to move naturally toward journalism, media, storytelling, but the most important chapter of her life began when she met Tom Meagher. Tom wasn't just her husband. By every account, they were best friends. They married in 2008, and 1 year later, they moved together to Melbourne, Australia, chasing a new beginning thousands of miles from home. Melbourne suited them, especially Brunswick, the neighborhood where they settled. Brunswick was creative, artistic, filled with cafes, bars, bookstores, musicians, students, late-night conversations, and people who believed their city was safe. Jill found work with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the ABC, where co-workers adored her almost immediately. She had this rare ability to make professionalism feel human. She remembered birthdays. She checked on people when they were quiet. She listened carefully when others spoke. One colleague later said Jill had the type of energy that made you feel better after talking to her. She wasn't just liked, she was loved. And on Friday, September 21st, 2012, everything about her life still felt completely normal. That evening, Jill met co-workers after work for drinks, first at Brunswick Green, then later at a nearby bar called Bar Etiquette along Sydney Road. It wasn't unusual, it was Friday night. People laughed, drank, relaxed after work. Jill seemed happy, relaxed. At around 1 a.m., she decided to head home. Her apartment was only a short walk away, 5 to 7 minutes at most. Melbourne nights in Brunswick were usually full of people. Music drifting from bars, taxis moving through intersections, smokers standing outside venues, talking loudly under streetlights. Jill had walked these streets many times before. She hugged her friends goodbye and stepped outside into the cool night air. While walking home, she called her brother Michael. The conversation was ordinary. They spoke briefly about their father George, who had been ill. There was no fear in her voice, no urgency, just a sister talking casually to her brother during the walk home. After hanging up, she kept walking. That ordinary phone call would later become emotionally devastating to her family because it was the last conversation Jill would ever have. Around 2 a.m., Tom woke up at home and realized Jill still wasn't there. At first, he probably assumed she stayed talking with coworkers longer than expected, but minutes passed. Then more minutes. He called her phone, no answer. Again, nothing. Anxiety slowly began replacing logic. Tom got dressed and walked the exact route Jill would have taken home. The streets were mostly quiet now. He checked outside the bars, looked into side streets. Nothing. No Jill, no sign of a disturbance, no indication that anything had gone wrong. He returned home and called police. By then, instinct had already started telling him something terrible had happened. Friends later said Tom knew immediately this wasn't normal behavior for Jill. She would never disappear without contacting someone. Never. Police initially handled the situation as a missing persons case. Standard procedure. Adults disappear temporarily all the time. Maybe she stayed with a friend. Maybe her battery died. But Tom kept insisting something was wrong. Deeply wrong. As daylight arrived over Melbourne the next morning, Jill's disappearance started spreading through social media. Her coworkers at ABC immediately mobilized. Friends organized search efforts. Posters appeared around Brunswick almost overnight. A Facebook page called Help Us Find Jill Meagher exploded across Australia. Tens of thousands followed it within days. People who had never met Jill shared her photo desperately, hoping someone had seen something. Melbourne became emotionally invested in finding her because Jill represented something deeply unsettling. An ordinary woman vanishing during a short walk home in a neighborhood everyone considered safe. The fear felt personal. Women across Australia began imagining themselves in Jill's position. Walking home after drinks, familiar streets, bright lights, public spaces, and suddenly disappearing forever. The case escalated rapidly. Detectives began retracing Jill's final known movements minute by minute. CCTV cameras became the center of the investigation. Investigators collected footage from bars, shops, traffic intersections, storefronts, and businesses along Sydney Road. They reviewed endless hours of recordings searching for a single clue. Somewhere inside those blurry frames was the answer to what happened during the final minutes of Jill's life. Then, on September 24th, investigators found something disturbing. Jill's handbag appeared in a laneway off Hope Street, but there was a problem. Police had already searched that area previously. The bag hadn't been there earlier, which meant someone returned and placed it after Jill disappeared. Someone was revisiting the scene. That changed everything psychologically. Detectives realized they were no longer dealing with a spontaneous incident or accidental death. Whoever abducted Jill was watching the investigation unfold, potentially following media coverage, potentially inserting themselves into the search itself. The same day, the case officially transferred to homicide detectives. And then came the breakthrough. Investigators obtained CCTV footage from a bridal shop called Duchess Boutique. The camera pointed toward a sidewalk outside. When detectives watched the recording carefully, they noticed Jill standing beneath the storefront lights, speaking to an unknown man wearing a blue hoodie. Footage was chilling because Jill didn't appear terrified. She appeared cautious but conversational. At one point, she raised her phone slightly as if trying to create distance or signal discomfort politely. Detectives later discovered the same man had walked past the shop minutes earlier before returning to approach her. The footage captured the final confirmed moments Jill Meagher remained alive. Police released the image publicly. The man in the blue hoodie instantly became the center of national attention. News stations replayed the footage constantly. People across Australia stared at the grainy image, wondering who he was. Thousands of tips flooded into police lines. But while the public focused on the CCTV image, detectives quietly followed another critical lead: Jill's phone. Investigators tracked activity connected to her SIM card. The signal eventually pointed them toward a house in Coburg, a suburb north of Melbourne. On September 27th, police arrived at the address. The man living there was 1-year-old Adrian Ernest Bailey. He appeared calm when officers approached him. No panic, no resistance. He simply walked outside and got into the police vehicle. But inside his home, detectives discovered something that immediately shattered whatever story he planned to tell. Hidden among laundry inside a washing machine was Jill Meagher's SIM card. The SIM card from her missing phone. Investigators suddenly realized they were dealing with something far darker than anyone imagined. And as detectives continued searching deeper into Bailey's history, they uncovered a horrifying truth that would soon leave Australia asking one terrifying question: why was this man ever free to begin with? The moment detectives found Jill Meagher's SIM card inside Adrian Bailey's washing machine, the entire atmosphere inside the investigation changed. Up until then, police still carried a tiny hope that maybe Jill was alive somewhere, maybe abducted, maybe injured, maybe hidden. But the discovery of that SIM card inside the suspect's home destroyed those possibilities almost instantly. Veteran investigators later admitted they already feared the worst before entering the interrogation room. What they needed now was a confession. And somewhere beneath the calm expression Adrian Bailey showed police that afternoon, detectives sensed something deeply disturbing waiting to surface. At first, Bailey denied everything. He sat across from investigators, speaking in an almost casual tone, claiming he only recognized Jill from media coverage. He insisted he had never met her, never spoken to her, never seen her before. But experienced homicide detectives are trained to watch far more than words. They study breathing, eye movement, facial tension, tiny cracks inside behavior. Detective Sergeant Paul Rowe later described a specific moment when Bailey's entire demeanor shifted. It happened when investigators revealed they had found Jill's SIM card in his house. Suddenly, his confidence disappeared. His posture changed. The color drained from his face. The performance began collapsing in real time. For nearly 10 hours, detectives applied pressure carefully, piece by piece, destroying every lie he attempted to construct. Then finally, Bailey broke. What he confessed to inside that interrogation room horrified even seasoned investigators. He admitted he saw Jill walking alone along Sydney Road shortly after her phone call with her brother. He approached her pretending to offer help because she looked lost. But Jill immediately rejected him, politely, firmly. She didn't need help. She wanted to continue walking home. And according to Bailey's own statement, that rejection made him angry. That detail matters psychologically because it reveals something terrifying about offenders like Bailey. The violence wasn't triggered by desperation. It was triggered by entitlement. Jill's refusal challenged his sense of control. And in his mind, that became justification for brutality. Bailey admitted grabbing Jill and dragging her into a nearby laneway off Hope Street. The attack escalated quickly. He raped her repeatedly, then strangled her to death using his bare hands. The sheer intimacy of manual strangulation makes crimes like this especially horrifying. It requires prolonged physical force, prolonged awareness. The victim told me fights for survival while the killer watches life disappear second by second. Investigators later described the crime as predatory and calculated, but also deeply personal in its violence. And somehow the horror didn't end there. After killing Jill, Bailey returned home, retrieved a shovel, got into his car, then drove back to collect her body. Imagine the psychological coldness required for that sequence of decisions. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't irrational. He was problem-solving, treating Jill's body like evidence needing disposal rather than a human being whose life he had just stolen. Bailey drove nearly 50 kilometers outside Melbourne toward a secluded area near Gisborne South. There, under darkness, he dug a shallow grave and buried Jill. The grave was shockingly shallow, barely more than 30 centimeters deep. Investigators later believed he rushed because of fear, exhaustion, and rising daylight. But perhaps the most surreal detail came afterward. On his drive back toward Melbourne, Bailey actually ran out of fuel. At one point, he flagged down a random passing driver for assistance while Jill's body lay buried in the backcountry behind him. That image haunted investigators later because it demonstrated how terrifyingly normal predators can appear immediately after unimaginable violence. To strangers, Bailey looked like an ordinary man stranded beside the road. Calm, harmless, forgettable. But hours earlier, he had murdered a young woman whose husband and family were desperately searching for her. Later that evening, Bailey agreed to lead detectives directly to Jill's body. Police vehicles moved carefully through the dark rural roads until they reached Black Hill Road near Gisborne South. Detectives walked through rough terrain illuminated by flashlights and vehicle beams. Eventually, Bailey pointed toward disturbed earth. Officers began digging, and there, beneath shallow soil, they found Jill Meagher. The confirmation devastated Australia. News spread almost instantly across television, radio, newspapers, and social media. People who had spent days desperately hoping Jill would be found alive suddenly faced the brutal reality of what happened during those missing 7 minutes between the bar and her front door. But even as Australia mourned Jill, investigators began uncovering something even more horrifying than the murder itself. Adrian Bailey should never have been free to kill her. When suppression orders lifted and Bailey's criminal history became public, outrage exploded nationwide. Because this wasn't a hidden predator unknown to police, this was a repeat violent sex offender with a history stretching back decades. His first known sexual assault occurred when he was just 18 years old. He raped his sister's 16-year-old friend inside his own home while his pregnant wife was nearby. Less than a year later, he attacked another teenage girl near a bus stop, threatening to kill her during the assault. Then came another attempted rape involving a 16-year-old hitchhiker abducted and driven to an isolated location. These weren't isolated mistakes. They were patterns, escalating patterns. Yet despite multiple violent offenses, Bailey served less than 2 years before release. Then, for several years, there appeared to be silence, relationships, children, ordinary life on the surface. But beneath that surface, the violence returned. Between 2000 and 2001, Bailey systematically targeted sex workers around Melbourne. At least 5 women later came forward. During interviews, Bailey openly stated he considered sex workers worthless. That sentence alone revealed the psychological framework investigators were dealing with. A man who categorized women according to perceived value and believed certain women existed beneath normal human empathy. In 2002, Bailey was finally sentenced to 11 years prison for 16 separate rape charges involving multiple victims. 16 charges, multiple victims. Yet even then, the minimum term was only 8 years. He later completed rehabilitation programs, said all the correct things to parole authorities, and was released in 2010. But the failures continued. In 2011, while still officially on parole, Bailey violently assaulted a young man outside a cafe, breaking his jaw. He served only a short sentence. His parole remained active, which means something almost impossible to comprehend became true. On the night Jill Meagher was murdered, Adrian Bailey was still officially on parole for violent sexual offenses. Australia erupted with fury when this became public, because Jill's murder suddenly felt preventable. Entirely preventable. And then another devastating revelation emerged. Bailey's own mother had repeatedly warned authorities about him before Jill's murder. She contacted parole officers expressing fear and concern about her son's behavior. She begged people inside the justice system to listen. Later, during interviews after Jill's death, she emotionally described feeling ignored by every institution she approached. Imagine the weight of that reality. Even the killer's mother believed he posed a danger to women. Yet, somehow the system still allowed him freedom. Victims' advocates later stated publicly that if Bailey had simply received maximum sentencing for earlier crimes, Jill would still be alive because he would still have been in prison. That realization changed the public conversation completely. The focus shifted beyond one murder toward deeper questions about parole, rehabilitation, sentencing, violence against women, and whether society consistently underestimates predatory offenders until tragedy forces accountability. Meanwhile, Melbourne transformed emotionally. Thousands gathered for vigils along Sydney Road. Flowers covered sidewalks outside Dutch's boutique, where the final CCTV footage captured Jill alive. Candles burned through the night. People cried openly beside strangers. Women described feeling afraid walking home for the first time in their own city. Jill's face appeared everywhere across Australia, not just because of the brutality of the crime, but because she represented someone deeply relatable, educated, loved, successful, ordinary, simply walking home after drinks with co-workers. And perhaps that's what frightened people most. There was no reckless decision, no dangerous environment, no obvious risk. Jill did everything society tells women should keep them safe. Yet she still encountered a predator who had spent years slipping through institutional failures. But while the public processed grief and anger, another wave of horror was approaching. Because once media coverage intensified, more women began recognizing Adrian Bailey's face from their own past traumas. Women who had stayed silent for years suddenly realized the man dominating national headlines was the same man who assaulted them long before Jill's murder. And as investigators reopened older cases connected to Bailey, they uncovered a disturbing possibility. Jill Meagher may not have been his final victim if police hadn't stopped him when they did. As Adrian Bailey sat inside prison, awaiting trial for Jill Meagher's rape and murder, something unexpected began happening across Australia. Women started recognizing his face, not vaguely, not uncertainly, instantly. One woman scrolling through Facebook froze when she saw a news image connected to Jill's case. Her stomach dropped. The man staring back at her from the screen was the same man who had raped her years earlier. Another woman came forward soon after. Then, another. For investigators, it was like watching buried ghosts suddenly rise into daylight all at once. The deeper police looked into Bailey's history, the more horrifying the pattern became. Jill Meagher wasn't an isolated tragedy. She was part of a trail the justice system had failed to stop for decades. One Dutch backpacker told investigators she immediately recognized Bailey after seeing media reports. Years earlier, he had attacked her with terrifying violence. She later described how he grabbed her throat during the assault, overpowering her completely. And suddenly, women who had once believed their cases were forgotten realized something deeply painful. The man who attacked them had remained free long enough to kill someone else. That realization carried enormous emotional weight throughout Australia, because every new victim who came forward reinforced the same devastating truth: this was preventable, completely preventable. During 2014 and 2015, multiple additional rape trials took place. Bailey was convicted again and again. More prison years stacked onto his sentence. More testimony emerged describing patterns of predatory violence stretching back decades. By the end, investigators confirmed at least 12 known victims connected to Bailey's sexual crimes. At least 12. And even detectives admitted privately the real number was probably much higher. Some victims never report, some never speak publicly, some spend entire lifetimes trying to forget, which meant Australia was confronting not just a murderer, but a serial predator hidden in plain sight for years, while systems repeatedly failed to stop him. But perhaps the most emotionally powerful voice to emerge after Jill's death wasn't a detective, prosecutor, or politician. It was Tom Meagher. In the months after Jill's murder, many people expected Tom to speak publicly with rage and hatred toward Bailey. And honestly, no one would have blamed him. His wife had been stolen from him in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. But instead, Tom said something that forced people everywhere to think differently about violence against women. At first, Tom admitted he wanted to think of Bailey as a monster, something non-human, something separate from ordinary society. Because psychologically, that idea feels comforting. If killers are monsters, then ordinary people can believe they're different from the rest of humanity. It creates distance, safety. But during court proceedings, Tom listened carefully to Bailey speaking. Calm voice, ordinary language, no dramatic insanity, no cinematic evil, just a man. And that realization disturbed Tom more deeply than the idea of a monster ever could. Because if Bailey wasn't some supernatural creature hiding in shadows, then society had to confront something far more uncomfortable. Violent men often look ordinary. They work jobs, have relationships, sit beside people at cafes, walk through shopping centers unnoticed. In 2014, Tom wrote an essay titled "The Danger of the Monster Myth." And the essay exploded internationally because it challenged the way people emotionally process crimes like Jill's murder. Tom argued that calling offenders monsters allows society to avoid examining deeper systemic issues. If killers are viewed as rare inhuman anomalies, then people don't have to confront the culture, institutional failures, misogyny, warning signs, and social attitudes enabling violence long before murders happen. Tom's essay forced people to acknowledge a brutal reality. Violence against women rarely emerges from nowhere. It grows slowly through entitlement, dehumanization, control, repeated offenses, and systems failing to intervene effectively. And in Bailey's case, warning signs existed for decades. Tom's words resonated globally because they came from unimaginable grief transformed into clarity instead of vengeance. Rather than disappearing from public life, he became an advocate for conversations many people found uncomfortable but necessary. And perhaps that became part of Jill's legacy too. Not just tragedy, awareness, pressure, change. Meanwhile, Australia's justice system faced enormous scrutiny. Politicians publicly admitted failures had occurred. Parole laws became a national topic almost overnight. How could someone convicted repeatedly of violent sexual crimes remain free? Why had previous victims seemingly mattered less because some were sex workers? Why were parole assessments failing so catastrophically? Then another shocking revelation emerged in 2015. A DNA sample collected from Bailey years earlier had never properly entered the National Police Database. For 14 years, critical forensic information essentially sat invisible inside the system. Detectives later admitted that if the DNA had been processed correctly, Bailey could have been identified dramatically faster during Jill's case. That discovery horrified the public because it highlighted something terrifying. Sometimes catastrophic failures aren't caused by evil alone, but by bureaucracy, negligence, missed paperwork, and systems quietly malfunctioning for years until somebody dies. Following public outrage, Victoria overhauled parole rules for violent offenders. Breaches resulted in automatic imprisonment rather than lengthy review processes. Officials openly acknowledged the system had failed Jill Meagher. But for Jill's family, reforms came too late. No legal change could reverse the reality they now lived with permanently. Jill was gone forever. And behind all the public debate, legal reform, media coverage, and national outrage remained something heartbreakingly simple: a husband who still woke up without his wife. A family forced to continue existing after unimaginable loss. Friends adjusting to empty spaces where Jill's laughter once existed. During Jill's funeral in Melbourne, co-workers from ABC gathered alongside police officers who worked the case, family members who traveled from Ireland, and thousands emotionally affected by her story. People described Jill as vibrant, funny, intelligent, clumsy in an endearing way, endlessly warm. One friend recalled Jill once literally slipping on a banana peel like a comedy scene and somehow laughing harder than everyone else around her. Those small details matter because crimes this horrific often reduce victims into headlines or case files. But Jill wasn't just evidence inside an investigation. She was a woman with habits, humor, ambitions, relationships, and a future abruptly erased during a 7-minute walk home. Tom later spoke emotionally about one realization that continued haunting him. Society often tells women how to avoid violence instead of focusing enough attention on violent men themselves. Jill didn't behave recklessly. She wasn't irresponsible. She simply existed in public space at night. And for millions watching this case unfold, that truth felt deeply unsettling because it shattered comforting illusions about safety and predictability. Adrian Bailey eventually received life imprisonment with an extended minimum parole period stretching decades into the future. After appeals and additional convictions, he would not even become eligible for parole consideration until old age. Reports later stated he became hated inside prison, even among other inmates. But for many people, punishment alone never felt emotionally sufficient, because the question lingering over everything wasn't merely how could one man commit this crime. The larger question was, how many chances was he given before someone finally died? Even Bailey himself reportedly admitted during interrogation that he should never have been released. Imagine hearing that from the killer himself. The system failed so visibly that even the offender recognized it. Today, years later, Jill Meagher's story still resonates globally because it sits at the intersection of so many fears society struggles to confront honestly: violence against women, institutional failure, public safety, parole reform, victim advocacy, media responsibility, the psychology of predatory offenders. But beneath all those discussions remains one haunting image impossible to forget. A woman captured calmly walking through Melbourne after a night with friends, only minutes from home, unaware that someone watching her from the darkness had already decided she would never arrive there alive. 7 minutes. That was all she needed to reach safety. 7 minutes separating ordinary life from irreversible horror. And maybe that's why this case continues haunting people long after headlines faded. Because Jill Meagher represented someone heartbreakingly familiar, someone people could easily imagine knowing or being. A woman laughing with friends one moment, then becoming a national tragedy the next. And somewhere in Melbourne tonight, people still walk along Sydney Road past the place where the final CCTV footage captured Jill alive. Cars still move through intersections. Bars still glow with late-night conversations. Music still drifts into the streets. Life continued forward, the way cities always do after tragedy. But for those who remember Jill's story, that stretch of sidewalk never fully became ordinary again.